Hello everybody, we're the Anserines, and we're going to talk about plural superheroes, or superpowered systems, or how the conventions of superhero comics naturally carry a sort of inherent plurality, or how storytellers can use plurality as a tool for exploring the interiority of their characters, or how capitalist society naturally creates pluralities in its subjects that are then reflected in the popular media of the modern age, or, well, you get the idea. April 1938. Reporter Lois Lane slaps a man who's been harassing her. Clark Kent, her co-worker, is shocked at this behaviour, but secretly, as Superman, he approves. In a single panel, we see Superman's thoughts and Kent's words put into stark contrast. Is Clark Kent faking his reaction? It's completely in line with his behaviour. If Superman were here, he probably wouldn't tell Lois not to hit the man, but Superman isn't here. Clark is. Who is Clark Kent? Is he a mask Superman wears, or is he a person who dissociates his passion for justice into another personality? Is it really necessary for Clark to be such a coward in the face of someone's bad behaviour? If Clark did stand up for Lois in this moment, would that really endanger his secret identity that much? Perhaps the better question is, if Superman made up Clark Kent, then why is Clark Kent such a coward? Maybe Clark Kent made up Superman and needs that mask to feel brave enough to do what's right. Who hasn't tried to envision a braver, stronger, more attractive version of themselves? Earlier the same day, Clark's boss tells him to investigate this Superman. Clark responds, "If I can't find out anything about this Superman, no one can." We, as readers, can see the irony, already knowing that Clark Kent and Superman are one and the same. But are they? In a sense, these are really two persons in partnership. Clark is the workaday investigator who uses the access Superman grants him to be a better journalist. Superman is the muscle who fights for what is right based on information gained via Clark's job. Neither one is more real than the other, and they both rely on each other to further their shared goals. March 1939. Rich industrialist Bruce Wayne returns home from a meeting with the police commissioner. Bruce Wayne is, as the commissioner says, a nice young chap, but must lead a boring life and seems disinterested in everything. But we see more. We see Bruce's other face. The masked crime fighter called the Batman. How can a man as distant and idle as Bruce Wayne become a crusader for justice? On the other hand, how can a serious, dedicated crime fighter like the Batman become as carefree as Bruce Wayne? Is anyone ever really how they seem on the surface? Since at least the Scarlet Pimpernel, superhero stories have been filled with people who have multiple contrasting personas. We've already seen Superman being confident and strong, while Clark Kent is simpering and weak, really. And Batman is dark and dangerous, but Bruce Wayne is charming and playful. And this often leads superhero fans to ask questions like, well, who's real? Is it Batman that's the real one, or is Superman the real one? But as plurals, we know that's a bit of a silly question. In this talk, we're going to explore themes of plurality as seen in superhero comics, and ask why exactly it's so common to see plurality represented in this medium in particular. Issue 1. No one can know my secret identity. Superhero comics are filled with people who have something to hide. Clark Kent hides his alien identity. His creators, Siegel and Schuster, were Jewish children of immigrants, so the idea of a character hiding his origin almost certainly held some resonance for them. The X-Men have served as an allegory for all sorts of things, ranging from race relations to politics, but most relevant is their role as a stand-in for LGBT issues in the closet. Have you tried not being a nuisance? And there's the nation of Wakanda, and its status as a secret nation where black people hold a rich and technologically advanced culture. These are all examples of secret worlds. By reading a comic, you become in the know, and comics often appeal to readers by letting them in on secrets. This is especially appealing to audiences who might be used to or even sick of hiding things. Because, a secret turns a source of shame into a source of power. Communities like immigrants or religious minorities or queer people are all likely to find some power in the idea that something they felt like they had to hide is actually something that makes them stronger. But why do we hide things? Well, let's look at capitalism. Capitalism kind of works by demanding a conformity in its workers, starting all the way back in school. The ideal worker is fungible, meaning that you can interchange them. You can always find another worker who can do the same job or approximately the same job. So differences between workers have to either be catalogued and categorized through things like exams or clubs or awards, or they have to be repressed by things like bullying, school uniforms, detention. The perpetual penalty that traverses all points and supervises every instant in the disciplinary institutions compares, differentiates, hierarchizes, homogenizes, excludes. Michel Foucault, Discipline and Punish. By contrast, a superhero's costume and abilities are almost always unique. Even when you have a team of superheroes that all wear the same costume, they'll often have different hair or different builds. In other words, superheroes offer us a world where these secret and repressed elements of ourselves might be able to have a life of their own. And one of the key ways that comics let us in on the secret is through thought bubbles. Thought bubbles are clouds that sit above a character's head and tell us what they're thinking. Thought bubbles let us in on a character's inner life. We've already seen how Superman's thoughts contrast with Clark Kent's words. In the golden and silver ages of comics, thought bubbles that reminded us of a character's secret identity became almost cliché. And while more modern comics often eschew actual thought bubbles in favour of narration boxes, they still give us some kind of inside view of the characters through those narration boxes. Now, when we have two or more personas sharing a body that are so different, it's only natural that some stories might put those personas in conflict. In fact, it's precisely these conflicts that make superhero characters so interesting. And even when characters decide not to separate personas like this, for example, Tony Stark and Iron Man, this serves as a subversion of our expectations. So, as plurals, it's pretty natural that we might find ourselves identifying with these characters and their internal disagreements. Here's a character you've probably heard of before. In 1962, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby broke fresh ground with The Incredible Hulk. This comic is a bit different to other superhero comics, at least at the time, in two main ways. Firstly, Bruce Banner and the Hulk are not just different personas with the same underlying person. They are effectively different people with different goals and different attitudes. And secondly, the Hulk isn't an enthusiastic hero, he's quite a reluctant one, and he's often feared by the people he helped rather than praised. Later stories, starting in 1984 during the Bill Mantlo run, would present this as a kind of DID, stemming from an abusive childhood. And they would add other characters to the system, like Joe Fixit and the Devil Hulk. Here's a slightly less well-known character. Dorothy Spinner is a character introduced in Doom Patrol Volume 2 by Paul Kopperberg and Eric Larson, able to bring imaginary beings to life. In an early story, she's haunted by her dead imaginary friends, Damn All, Darling Come Home, and Flying Robert, who represent her abusive family and her anxieties around puberty. And her mind eventually becomes the home of another entity called the Candlemaker. So, Dorothy's bright, childish exterior hides a lot of darkness inside, but that darkness finds its own ways to come to the front. In short, superhero comics let us see inside our characters, like so few other stories do. Issue 2. This mask will protect me. Comic book depictions of multiplicity owe a lot to Robert Louis Stevenson's 1886 novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In this story, Dr. Henry Jekyll creates a serum to hide his evil propensities with a different, uglier face. If each, I told myself, could be housed in separate identities, life would be relieved of all that was unbearable. The unjust might go his way, delivered from the aspirations and remorse of his more upright twin. At first, this isn't a separate persona, but over time it becomes more and more independent of Jekyll. I now had 2 characters as well as 2 appearances. So what starts out as a mask becomes a new person entirely. Comics as a visual medium convey a lot in how characters appear. Heroic characters are often attractive, healthy and young, whereas villainous characters are often deformed, scarred, or monstrous. The ableism and other prejudices of the writer, artist, and reader will find their way onto the page. A character who operates as multiple personas will often have their personas look physically different in ways that highlight their different personalities. And this can subvert the expectations of the reader in entertaining ways, as well as allow them to project more easily onto the protagonist. It's a lot easier to imagine yourself as a superhero if the superhero's civilian identity looks like you. The face digs the hole that subjectification needs in order to break through. It constitutes the black hole of subjectivity. Deleuze and Guattari, 1,000 Plateaus. Let's compare the faces of Clark Kent and Superman. See how Superman's chin is more prominent, how his cheekbones are subtly more defined, how his brow is heavier and his neck muscles are far more pronounced. Look at how the raggedy edge of Superman's shadow is more like Clark Kent's outline than his own. Look at how stiff Clark Kent holds himself while dancing with Lois Lane compared to Superman's more powerful body language. The same face and body can look quite different in a new light. Why is a face so powerful? Well, modern society exists in a kind of panopticon, a state of constant surveillance. Just as with Mr. Hyde's new face, a mask offers freedom. Freedom from responsibility, from judgment, from consequence. And this freedom and lightness grants a confidence that in turn further differentiates the mask in both personality and bearing. And that's probably why so many superhero origin stories have this moment of exhilarating freedom where bounds of society, responsibility, even physical limitations are lifted. But a new face can have a dark side. Let's talk about Two-Face. Two-Face was introduced as Harvey Kent in Detective Comics 66, though later he'd be renamed to Harvey Dent to differentiate from Superman. Harvey is Gotham's district attorney, the man charged with prosecuting criminals, but in this story he suffers chemical burns on one side of his face, leading to him becoming obsessed with the duality of good and evil. He makes all his decisions with a two-headed coin, one side of which is scratched. And in these 2 panels we see Two-Face's 2 sides contrasted. First we see his noble side, holding a clean coin, and then we see his darker side, revealing the scratch on the coin's other face. Two-Face does as many good deeds as bad, dictated by the luck of the coin. Decades later, we get a revised origin for Two-Face, as a victim of childhood abuse. He's explicitly a system here, with his Two-Face side being cynical and believing in fate, while Harvey is idealistic and believes in free choice. The face, as the window to the soul, dictates the form the soul takes, as well as its actions. Changing the face could change the person. Issue 3. Good thing I have my utility belt. Superheroes often have more than one special ability. Batman is a brilliant detective on top of being an engineer and a martial artist. And Reed Richards is a scientist and has his elastic powers. Nightcrawler has teleportation, night vision, enhanced agility, and is a trained circus acrobat. But a hero with too much power is hard to challenge. You get the kryptonite problem, where Superman has so many different abilities between flight, strength, laser vision, cold breath, etc., that a lot of his foes have to rely on his one major weakness in order to have any hope of winning. If you divide abilities among different personas, this puts a limitation on the hero, which allows for more compelling storytelling. Another way to limit a power is to make it subconscious. The hero would no longer have control over when the power is used or how. For example, Spider-Man's spider sense essentially lets him see into the future, but only in certain situations, and only to warn him of immediate danger. And Jubilee of the X-Men will lose control of her powers when she gets angry. And of course, Bruce Banner can only really use the Hulk's strength when Hulk is on board with the idea. This is great for a storyteller, because not only does the struggle to get control of a power make for a compelling story arc, it also means you can make his fight easier or harder just because the powers weren't working right that day. In a sense, multiplicity is itself a skill set. We can subdivide ourselves and hold contradictory abilities and beliefs inside our heads. And the problem isn't necessarily that we do it, it's that we might struggle to have control over it. We might reach down to our psychic utility belts and pull up the bat shark repellent when we're actually fighting a dragon. Our own spider senses tingle, but we don't always know why or how to fix it. So, multiplicity as superpower, and superpower as multiplicity. The metaphor works in both directions. So, let's meet Crazy Jane. Crazy Jane was introduced in Doom Patrol Volume 2, number 19, the first comic of Grant Morrison's now classic run. She was actually inspired by the real-life memoir When Rabbit Howls by the Troops for Trudy Chase, which is a memoir by a system. Jane's one of 64 system members, each with different powers. And a little later on the run, we even get a look inside their inner world, the underground, when Robot Man, this other character here, goes inside Jane's mind. We meet many different members of her system and see some of the traumatic memories she's repressed. There are actually so many plural characters in Grant Morrison's run. A different take on the concept is Moon Knight. Moon Knight was introduced in Werewolf by Night number 32 by Doug Munch and Don Perlin. He's connected to the Egyptian moon god Khonshu, and he has 3 different civilian identities. He has Mark Spector, the mercenary, Stephen Grant, the rich investor, and Jake Lockley, the cab driver. Munch's idea was kind of to combine the different members of a team as different aspects of the same person. Different writers have had different takes on these identities. Sometimes they just cover identities, sometimes they're aspects of Khonshu, and sometimes they are alters in a DID system. In Bendis' run, there are even introjects of other superheroes. In a very real sense, this is a plural comic. Every different writer has a completely different take on the character. So, different personas do serve different purposes in different situations, allowing the writer to switch up things as the needs of the story dictate. Issue 4. Now, finally, I know the truth. Most superhero comics will change creative teams every so often. Changing creative teams is something of a necessity with characters who are up to 90 years old. And the new writers often don't want to be bound to decisions the previous writers have made. So we have this convention, the retcon, where aspects of the character's backstory are changed or recontextualized to suit the needs of the current writer. This happens so frequently, it's basically a staple, a cliché of the genre. This kind of goes back to letting readers in on the secret. If you read superhero comics for long enough, and you'll see these little footnotes. These were an idea of Stan Lee's. little marketing tactic to tell you, if you want the full context of what's going on here, go read this other comic. This creates a sort of plural canon of interconnections that reframe, recontextualize, or even rewrite existing stories. Of course, this intertextuality can backfire, leading to stories that are impenetrable to all but the most die-hard fans. And these days, most creators try to strike a balance between being part of a wider continuity and having a self-contained story. Because of the multitude of different voices all working on a single shared universe, inconsistency, whether accidental or deliberate, is inevitable. And dissociative disorders are a godsend to writers who want to retcon something. If you want to change something about your character's life story, it's easy. They just didn't remember it right the first time round. For example, in Hulk 312, we learn about Bruce Banner's relationship with his abusive father and how this led to the development of his system. But it's not until Hulk -1, 12 years later, that we learn that Bruce actually killed his father, a detail changed to serve the needs of a different writer and justified via dissociative amnesia. And because this kind of revelation is often something traumatic, it makes perfect sense that it might be repressed that way. This idea of a dissociative retcon is epitomized by The Sentry. The Sentry debuted in his eponymous 2000 miniseries by Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee. He's presented as a kind of forgotten hero from the Silver Age, having teamed up with the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the Hulk, and the X-Men, and there are sequences within the comic that harken back to the artistic styles of those eras. But the Sentry was erased from memory, retconned out of existence, not just in the world of the comic, but in our world. If you go looking for him, you won't find him. And this was done to protect the world from his dark side. He's kind of the retcon superhero. Even he doesn't know the full truth of who he is. So, using amnesia as a plot device, a comic writer can just change the story to suit their current needs. Issue 5. Thank heavens for my faithful sidekick. So, the word sidekick was originally pickpocket slang. It meant the front pocket, which was most safe from being picked. And from there it kind of expanded in meaning to any close companion. And the comic world has a long tradition of sidekicks. Sidekicks can serve a number of different purposes. They can be an audience surrogate, like Robin the Boy Wonder or Rick Jones. They can be comic relief, like Jimmy Olsen. Or they can just be a generally useful person, like Alfred Pennyworth, or, again, Rick Jones. Now, most stories, at least in Western traditions, focus on conflict. And if you want to create conflict, adding characters to a story is a really easy way to do it. If the superhero relies on someone else, then that person's going to have their own needs and motivations, and sometimes those needs and motivations will clash with the superhero's, or anyone else's in the story for that matter. But what if a superhero themselves is the partnership? We can think of different elements of a system as layers that can both deflect and repress. Mark Spector shields Stephen Grant from the violence so that Grant can do his job more effectively, but that does come at the cost of Stephen Grant having less autonomy. And Bruce Banner's buried anger, his self-denial, becomes Hulk's strength, but Hulk often lacks the maturity to know what to do with it. Think about your own system. Are there times when the you that's most aware of something is also the least able to deal with it? As internal cooperation waxes and wanes, we have alternating periods of conflict and cooperation, just like in a good story. Meet Larry Traynor, aka Negative Man, introduced as a member of Doom Patrol in My Greatest Adventure number 80. Larry's thing is that he can send a ghostly spectre of himself out of his body as the result of an accident while he was a test pilot. But if that spectre is out of his body for too long, he'll die, and he's very vulnerable while the spectre is outside. Even from the start, the spirit is kind of treated as a separate being, albeit one without much agency. And then Grant Morrison, again, like I said, comes along and retcons this as the spirit being actually intelligent in a story where the spirit merges Larry with itself and his doctor to create a genderless being called Rebus. Here's a different version of this idea, Promethea. Promethea was created in 1999 by Alan Moore and J.H. Williams III. In universe, she's a kind of recurring story that possesses people who imagine her. She's even described as a recurring walk-in by one of the characters. Now, previous bearers of the mantle of Promethea, hosts if you will, all still exist in the world of the imagination, the immateria, and Promethea's current host is capable of contacting them and getting advice from them. And the lines between Promethea and her host get really blurry at times, especially when past hosts themselves come into the real world to possess people. There's also an in-system relationship in the story. I'll just leave that there. So, characters get stuck together and they have to make the best of it. Issue 6. A thrilling conclusion. So, what have we learned? Well, superhero comics naturally lend themselves to stories about conflicting and complementing personas, i.e., multiplicity, plurality. And this isn't just because of the content of the stories, but it's a characteristic of the medium of comics and the culture surrounding comic creation. The superhero is a kind of late capitalist power fantasy, a secret face for the faceless proletarian who lives and breathes in contradictions. And the conventions of comic book storytelling are their native language. But there's a lot more we could say about this. We could talk about time compression via techniques like collage. We could talk about how temporal information can be conveyed spatially or architecturally. The use of non-linearity in parallel tracks and panel layouts. Or how lettering and font choice can convey the character and nature of thought and speech. But I've probably said enough now. Right?